Okay, everybody, let's get started. So welcome to the MTV meetup for August. Your regular host, Steven, is on a flight back from London at the moment, so unfortunately you're stuck with me again. Sorry about that. So today we'll do a couple of announcements, and then our friend Jeff Cross, who you may have heard of, walking through the room, not sitting down. Sit down, please, Jeff. Thank you. Jeff's going to do a talk on Upgrade and some of the challenges in Upgrade, some of the things that are hard, some ways to make it easier. What? What's your title? King of the Nrwl. So that's on the next slide. Don't worry. And then we'll have some pretty cool demos from our interns at the end here. So announcements. Just to remind everybody, these talks are governed by our code of conduct. If you haven't read it, please do read it. It's important. We take it very seriously, so it's worth reading. Keep that in mind. Angular 4.3 is the current version. Not much to say about that. The way that we do development on Angular is generally we run in kind of 3-month cycles. So we do a 6-month release. The first 3 months, you see us do version 4.0, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3. And then the next 3 months, we kind of go back to doing development for the next version. So we're in this phase right now, this kind of second 3 months phase, where we're getting ready for 5.0, getting everything ship-shaped so we can ship it in about a month or so-ish. What's the month? About a month till 5? I hope it's not next week. So that'll be out fairly soon. We shipped Angular CLI 1.3.0 today. Big things about that is it's got experimental universal support. So that's in there, just about ready to go. You can try that out. If you go to the GitHub for Angular CLI and go to the stories in the wiki section, there's a nice explainer doc that kind of walks you through setting up a universal build. This lets you use less and Sass and all the cool stuff that the CLI can do. You know, the simplest thing, it'll let you do an express server and do pre-rendering. But this also allows you to do cool stuff like run your Angular application inside of a Firebase function and have it render and do all sorts of various different things. So this is early stage. We're still working through some issues, but more or less it's getting pretty close and ready to go. So we'd love you to try it out and give us feedback on that and kind of let us know how it's going. Also, it's upgraded to Webpack 3. Which brings in scope hoisting, which lets us get much better tree shaking, get a little more efficient on our bundling. I could talk about scope hoisting for an hour, so I'm not going to. It also brings in named lazy modules. What? No, I don't really want to talk about scope hoisting for an hour. Thank you. And it also brings in named lazy modules. It means you don't have like 0.js and 1.js anymore. You get a nice name that actually tells you that. I don't know why that slide is there because I'm in the wrong order. Oh my God. Actually, I deleted your slide, Jeff. That's what I did. Sorry. So I'm going to bring Jeff Cross up somewhere in between these two slides. And he's going to talk about NG Upgrade. Jeff used to be in the Angular team. Jeff used to sit next to me. We used to share an office together. It's very sad that we don't anymore. He works for an awesome company, or started an awesome company called Nrwl. They do Angular consulting for big companies. So welcome, Jeff.
You know, if you get any texts. All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the kind words, Rob. So I'm going to talk about upgrading from AngularJS to Angular. And like Rob said, I used to be on the Angular team. I was the tech lead of the mobile team here. And sadly, after we released Angular 2, it was okay to call it Angular 2 at the time back then. Not sadly, but we moved on. Another team member, Victor Safkin, and I started this company, Nrwl. So now we're doing Angular consulting. We help a lot of teams with complex challenges, as well as just helping them adopt best practices, figuring out the right way to do Angular at scale. We've got some cool materials, I think. If you go to our website, Nrwl.io, it tells a little bit about what we do, and our blog is chock full of advanced Angular content, and we tweet about it too. And we've got these few books you can check out. I'll share these slides later if you wanted to click links on any of these. So the company, it's like Nrwl. Nobody knows how to say it, or if it's the letters or whatever. I have a quick explainer slide here. It starts with the word Narwhal, and then we removed a few letters because we're a startup. And it ends up with Nrwl. And it was also, there were no domains available, so we had to shorten it to find something where we could get the Nrwl.io. So it's pronounced Narwhal, but you can call it whatever you want, Nrwl or Nrwl. I'll know what you mean. So I'm talking about upgrade tonight. The real upgrade expert is Victor Safkin, one of the Nrwls. And So I'll do my best to channel him. If you ask me hard questions, I might say I don't know the answer, and I'll say, come talk to me and we'll figure it out. But I'll really just text Victor and ask him the answer, which is fine. So he and I have worked on a lot of upgrade projects together. He having been the guy who wrote the router and helped with the upgrade module and change detection, dependency injection, like a lot of the key pieces of Angular 2. It was 2 at the time. We worked on it for 2 years and called it Angular 2, so it takes a while to break the habit. So yeah, we both work on it. He's the genius of the operation. We also have another Nrwaler in town here, Justin Schwarzenberger, who's visiting for the day. So like I said, okay, so Angular, I'm going to say Angular a lot in here. That only means Angular 2.0 plus, so Angular 4, Angular 5, all that. And AngularJS means Angular 1.x. And so to make Rob happy and Igor and Stephen Fluen, we don't say Angular 2 anymore. And when I say upgrade in this talk, I'm talking about a specific kind of upgrade strategy, the kind where you run AngularJS applications and Angular together in the same environment, which we also call hybrid mode. So where you run them in the same context and you are incrementally upgrading the application. So upgrading components and services one at a time to Angular from AngularJS in harmony. So we've helped a lot of teams at big companies upgrade from AngularJS to Angular. A lot of them are very long-term projects, so year-plus projects where we help them get started, we help them get the initial infrastructure in place, and then we support them along the way. So as part of that, we've noticed a lot of patterns, a lot of the things that are challenging for each team, and they're not things that we take a lot of the feedback and we try to help make the tooling better, but a lot of things are just things you have to apply brain power to fix. And so I want to try to convey some of that and some of what we see often, how you can spot it and what you can do about it when you see it so that you don't get stuck. So I've broken it down to 5 challenge areas, which are zones, routing, compile service, $compile from AngularJS, lazy loading with Angular 1, and state management. And so I've got this kind of example app that we'll use to illustrate some of the points, because it was hard to take these complex things we've seen from large applications and consolidate them into something. So I invented something to do it. And it's, being narwhals, it's a fish buffet app. So we find fish that look tasty. And this is, according to Wikipedia, narwhals eat halibut. So you can fact check this later if you want. But so I can add halibut, I can remove one, I can check out and pay for it. Some things about the application, it's got 100 million monthly active users, 500,000 lines of code, 200 AngularJS components. It took 100 developers over 2 years to build it. And we can't afford to do a full rewrite because we need to keep adding features and keep making our customers happy and that kind of thing. So we want to upgrade. We know we can't leave it in AngularJS forever. We want to embrace the new thing. We want the benefits of Angular, all the productivity and performance and all that jazz. So where do we start? Well, we recommend a strategy we call the upgrade shell, which is basically you want to have a lightweight Angular module written in Angular that is bootstrapping your AngularJS application. And so we start with a module that doesn't do anything other than bootstrap your AngularJS application. And we have a good blog article that Victor wrote about how we do it and with some steps on how you could do it yourself, which in the slides, you can find the link. You could also just go to blog.nrwl.io to find that yourself. So basically, to start with a shell, it's just a few steps to do it. In my application, I just created a new app with Angular CLI. I added the AngularJS app scripts in my index.html, just like I would have in the old way. I installed Angular Upgrade, the upgrade module from the Angular team. And I just added ngView or UIView to my app components template so that in my case, the Angular router, so ngView, so that the router would be able to add routes within my app. And then I downgraded the new Angular app component so that it could be used inside of AngularJS and added the upgrade module to app module. This is just here to tell you the steps that you would do. The blog article has more details on how you could actually do this. And it's pretty simple, but the point is, like, you don't do much, you just get a module in place, you have the environment where you could start doing incremental upgrades, and you just want to make sure this works. And then we bootstrap our AngularJS application inside of the app module's ng-do bootstrap. So with this in place, now we have our hybrid app working. It works just like it did before. It looks the same. Nothing's really different. So let's profile it, make sure the performance is how it was before, and see that there are no regressions, that it's still responsive, that kind of thing. And when I profile it, I see this, which if you've looked at a lot of profiles, this isn't good. You see something that's happening pretty much constantly on a loop, and this never ends. Rob, what do you think is happening?
I would not presume to guess.
Okay. So we do agree it doesn't look good, right? Okay. What's happening here, and this is a profile from a real application we've helped with, is recursive change detection is happening. So why is so much work happening? Well, this brings us to our first challenge area, which is zones. So zones are this thing that Rob Wormald invented. Actually, he didn't. It's inspired from Dart zones and many other prior arts, but it's a new global object used by Angular. Angular team's actually been working on getting this standardized. I couldn't tell you the status of that, but something that's global in the browser. Angular patches native browser APIs, like asynchronous APIs like set timeout, request animation frame, promise, XML HTTP request, in order to give you some properties like async stack traces and automatically run change detection when asynchronous events are detected. And this is basically the reason why we don't have scope digest in Angular, because it automatically knows when something async is done, it can trigger change detection for you. So AngularJS code was not written with zones in mind. Actually, AngularJS code never expected to be run in a hybrid mode. It didn't know it was going to be in this upgraded application ever. And so the application that your team has written or that third-party library authors have written don't account for these new things, like that change detection will happen when an async event occurs. So they didn't really think about this when they designed it. So things like request animation frame, set timeout are going to cause change detection every time they occur. So I looked at my application, I profiled it and figured out which function was causing this. And I found in one of my directives, somebody was doing a scope watch. So anytime there was dirty checking happening, they would do a request animation frame and set something else on the scope. And so when this request animation frame function would be invoked, then the zone would see it and then trigger change detection inside of Angular. And this is actually from a real third-party component, something along these lines. And so what do we do? If we control it, well, first we want to identify the culprit. So using Chrome Dev Tools, debugging, stepping through, looking at the profile and looking at function names and all that. I won't go into how to do that here because there's lots of tutorials you can find like on Chrome's developer docs to figure out how to do that. But you want to look for it and you want to figure out which functions are doing it and trace the source. But you have some options like you can run the events outside of Angular Zone, which is possible if you own the offending code. So if it's code that someone on your team has written and you can change it yourself, then you can do this. If it's a third-party code, you could technically fork it and do it, but typically you don't want to maintain third-party code. And so the other option is that you can bootstrap your AngularJS application outside of Angular, in which case async operations won't trigger change detection. So that request animation frame, you could continue doing it and it wouldn't cause this change detection. It would just do it the one time that whenever change detection already was occurring. A third thing I don't include here is you could improve the way the component is written. Typically, if you have a scope watch and you're doing a RAF, then you're probably doing something wrong and you should probably find a better way to do what you're trying to do. But here's a couple examples of what it would look like to run outside the Angular zone. You basically, inside of ng do bootstrap of your module, you would make the ng zone injectable within the AngularJS application, and then call this method run outside Angular with the code there. Or if you wanted to bootstrap the whole app outside of Angular, you would do this inside of your main TS. After your application's bootstrapped, you would get the upgrade module and bootstrap it in there, which is outside of Angular's own zone. So there's more about zones that you could look up on the zone GitHub repo or something. I won't go into, like, zones are hierarchical, so you derive new zones from parent zones, so you can go outside of the Angular zone, the root zone typically, to have things still be patched in a context, but not in a way that they'll trigger change detection. So that's the first problem, and we see that a lot of places. Even just introducing the shell with no features, you'll probably start to see that, and you'll need to solve those problems right away, and then they should be done for, so you can move on to the more interesting problems of upgrading. So we'll get next to routing. So we have a strategy that that we advocate for most applications, which is you have your AngularJS application, which is probably using the AngularJS router or UI router, and then you have your Angular application, which will presumably use Angular's router. And so we have a lot of blog articles on this that if you're really doing upgrade, I would look into. One is about how we do slicing of applications, where we say either vertical slicing or horizontal slicing. Vertical slicing is where you upgrade one route at a time. You kind of go down from a single route and upgrade everything within that. Horizontal is the opposite, where you just kind of work your way down, upgrading components a little bit at a time. But either way, we tend to advocate for having two router outlets living together and one of them owning the route at any given time. So where we'll have the new Angular router outlet, and then we'll have the ng view or UI view present to render the AngularJS routes. So we call the approach the single ownership approach. So we should only have one outlet active at a time. And so if we ever have a time where both outlets have content in them, then we've probably done something wrong. So for example, in Angular, we would say that for a feature sub1, like a feature we're expecting, then we route to this new Angular component. Otherwise, we map to this home component, which is basically an empty component. And we have path match full, so that as the router progresses and looks at your configuration and nothing matches, then it falls to this and will render an empty component. And then our AngularJS configuration, we have it where we have other features that AngularJS is in charge of. Otherwise, we just have an empty template. So this will mean if AngularJS matches a route, then it'll show that template. Otherwise, it'll show nothing because it assumes the other router outlet is going to handle it. It assumes it's outside of its own ownership. So what we've seen often is because real router configurations are more complex than that example. They're deep and they're kind of spread around applications. So it's easy to get to a place where you can have both outlets active at once. So in this case, I have two versions of my account view showing my AngularJS one and my Angular one. So how did this happen? Router misconfiguration is the most common cause. So both frameworks, router configuration, somehow are matching the same route and rendering a component to the router outlet. So in Angular, for example, I could have a path that's like this, where I just match by the prefix and do account/ID parameter. In AngularJS, I could have the same thing, account/ID/edit. So if I go to this edit, then I could have both outlets active at the same time. So how to fix this? Well, in Angular, your Angular configuration, you can use path match full to say to consume the full path of the URL. Or you could upgrade the full slice of the account to Angular, which is simpler, takes a little more time though. But those are your options. And then we get to $compile. Who likes $compile? I do. I know you do. I don't like upgrading it, but it's fun to use. It was fun in Angular tests, especially. So I have my fish product component that shows the fish I can buy, which is mostly halibut. And then I want to upgrade it to Angular. So I've got this special thing. I want to be able to change the template up on the fly. So I actually load the template from a service that will make it look nice based on whatever time of day it is, and then compile it dynamically using $compile. But there's some problems with this. The main one being that Angular doesn't have $compile. And that's because Angular likes statically analyzable components and modules. Basically, Angular likes to be able to know everything about your application without having to actually run your application. And so this gives us nice things like AOT and better linters, really good build tooling and better performance and that kind of thing. So things like $compile, where it's hard to know what's going to happen, what you're going to do, what kind of component you're going to come up with, just aren't supported out of the box without some fanfare anyway. So how to get around it? Well, if I want to load components from the server that have something dynamic that I can't know at build time in my application, I can at least build those into module factories on the server and then serve those and bring those into my application. Or I can find a way to remove the dynamic requirement. Now, there's some more creative ways, but those are about as far as you should attempt to go unless you really understand the compiler or Angular. So obviously, finding a way to remove dynamic requirement would be nice, but that's pretty hard. So looking into compiling modules into factories on the server is a good way to go. Unless if you want to get really advanced, just hire us and we'll help you build a crazy system and support it. for years. And then the fourth area is ng1 lazy loading, AngularJS lazy loading. I just said ng1 because I was out of space. So give me a break, Rob. So my application, I care about load performance. So I want the home screen to load really fast. And so I lazily load the shopping cart because people need to browse the app and add fish to their carts before they actually check out. So I have this shopping cart component that where they actually complete their purchase, and this is lazily loaded. So the problem with this is AngularJS doesn't really support lazy loading. That's one of the big reasons why it was rewritten to Angular. It's not built in by default. The injector, once it's created with Angular, is meant to be locked. But there are third-party libraries like OC Lazy Load that use workarounds. Workarounds, hacks really. Sorry, Olivier, but I mean, lots of people are doing different ways of lazy loading because it makes sense to do it, but AngularJS doesn't really make it easy, so people came up with different ways to work around the limitation, which have some trade-offs. So one thing about OC Lazy Load, which is probably the most popular lazy loading solution for AngularJS, it caches resources, assuming that the AngularJS app is going to stay active, stay in the view. Again, this was a library that wasn't written with the expectation of being inside this hybrid environment where AngularJS may come and go because your Angular application may be the key application and it may only occasionally load the AngularJS application and then get rid of it and then come back to it. And so the way it caches, it assumes the AngularJS app is going to stay active. And so if you navigate away from it and come back, then you're bootstrapping the application, it just doesn't work. There's some bugs with how it works, and it's pretty complicated why it's happening. So how do we fix it? Well, one way to keep using OC Lazy Load as part of your application is you can keep a hold of the AngularJS application that's been bootstrapped, cache it, keep it in memory, keep it active, so that if you navigate away from it and come back to it, it's still there. You're not going to have the reloading and other issues that are happening with OC Lazy Load. And obviously the other thing is you could just move to Angular and lazy load with Angular and do the right thing. And then the final area is state management. And this, Rob made me put this area in so I could plug in grx. But nobody's laughing at my jokes tonight. Okay, thank you. Sympathy laugh. So AngularJS apps don't really have conventions for state management. There's some libraries like Angular Data, some other ones like $resource is about as opinionated as the framework gets itself. But they don't really have strong conventions. It's pretty much you figure it out. We have services, that's good enough. So it leaves it to services to figure out their own rules about caching, mutations, data access, and nobody does it consistently. No developer does it the same as another developer on their team. And so this leads to some problems like mismatched state, like if people are mutating state in different ways or that making certain assumptions about how data is updated. You can end up with things like where I have this shopping cart that says 3 up here and 5 down here because somebody changed it somewhere and didn't get updated somewhere else. And so how to fix this is, one, you should use NGRX consistently for all new Angular features. NGRX is basically the de facto state management tool for Angular. I think that's safe to say, right, Rob? It's the way to do. Okay. It's one of the ways. Okay. Everyone's doing it. All of our customers are doing it pretty much. So you want to use NGRX consistently for all new Angular features. If you haven't looked into it, look at it, especially now they have the latest version NGRX4 as of a couple weeks ago, which is really nice, takes care of a lot of the little nuanced issues people had. So you want to move the critical pieces of your state, like the things that are shared throughout the application, updated frequently, complex parts of your state to Angular and NGRX as soon as possible. And you want to coordinate state mutations between AngularJS services and your AngularJS NGRX so you can make sure Angular and NGRX so you can make sure that the pieces of state that are shared between the applications, that there's some kind of coordination with observables or something where you can know when updates are happening to data or when data is being mutated. You can also inject the NGRX store into AngularJS so that if you do start moving, if you wanted to move all your services and all your data access and state management to Angular, but still be able to interact with it from your AngularJS directives, you can inject NGRX into AngularJS and manage it that way. So that's a quick overview of a lot of the things we've seen. We've got a series of blog articles at blog.nrwl.io that go into more depth. We also have this book that that is still a work in progress, but it's got a lot of content in already, which you can find at leanpub.com/ngupgrade. And we can also help. So if you are on a large complex application and you've been looking at upgrade, shoot us a note at hello@nrwl.io, and we can tell you a little bit about how we've helped teams do it. And that's it. And you can also visit the slides here at this link. I'll leave it up for a second so you can memorize the link and access the PDF of the slides. Otherwise, you can just go to our blog and pretty much everything. Well, actually, not a lot of this stuff is in the blog articles, but you can find us there. I'm done rambling now. Oh.
I think that's the most you've ever said my name at one of your talks.
You sat right up there.
I appreciate it.
You're a comfort to me. Are we doing Q&A at the end?
Oh, we are?
Okay.
I will invite you back up. Oh my God. Cool. Thank you for that, Jeff. So one of the things we do at Google is you can apply to be an intern at Google. If you're a university student, you're doing computer science or anything like that, you can apply to be an intern at Google. And typically then you end up with a host. And so the Angular team this year is hosting several different interns. And what you do when you're an intern is you come and we tell you what's the worst possible thing we have to deal with right now. And the intern get to do it. So they've been here for a few weeks and we're getting close to the end of their internships. So it's time to present their projects, show us what they've been doing, see that they've been justifying all the free food they've been eating of ours. So we've got 3 tonight, I think. Let's see what we've got. So I think we'll start with the shiny ones first. We had a couple of our interns working on the material team, getting more and more awesome Angular components ready to go for you. So who wants to go first? You go first? Come on up. I'll let you plug in. There you go.
And then what?
Should be good to go.
Share the screen
Just a
or
sec. Here we go. Cool. This is Lynn. She's one of our interns. You're going to show us the sticky stuff that you showed us in the meeting the other day?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is awesome. Pay attention to this. We loved it. Literally, the room went ooh when we saw this. So it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm Lynn, and today I'll talk about 2 components. The first one is sticky header, and the second one is selection list. Oops. So the first one is the sticky header. So the background of implementing the sticky header is because when you go to some website, for example, a restaurant's menu, let me see, we have the McDonald's menu, and you can see that there are many categories, right? So the most popular and the extra values and the all-day breakfast. So when you are scrolling up, you will find that the category is also scrolled up, right? So if we have lots of items, we will forget which categories are these items belongs to. So that is what sticky header solved. It will make the header stick at top of the page or at the top of the scrollable container. So here's the demo. So for now, it will be like this. So it's also the same demo, but when you are scrolling up, it will stick at the top. And when you scroll down, it comes back. So for different items, you can see which categories it belongs to. And so the next one is so you can find the demo here, and the repo is also here. So if you want to apply sticky header on your code, the most simple version is like this. You just need to design a scrollable container, which just to add a cdkScrollable tag to your div tag. And then you can just only define a sticky header. And after the sticky header, you can define all your components. So after that, when you scroll down, the header will be sticked at the top of the scrollable container. And so here is a more complicated version. So you can apply different class, and the most important part is you can define multiple headers in one scrollable container. But the one thing that you need to pay attention is that for one sticky header, you cannot apply multiple sticky headers in a same dev parent sticky region, which means that if you you delete this line and this line, it won't work because you have multiple sticky headers in one container. So you must define a sticky region for each sticky headers. So for the implementation, we have two parts. The first part is for those platforms that supports the browser's native sticky positioning. And so which makes the implementation much more easier. We just need to apply the position sticky or position WebKit sticky to the header. And here's the problem. The problem is IE does not support it, right? So you have to have another implementation for that. So for AngularJS, the implementation is to clone a new header, which is exactly the same as the original one, and stick it at the top of the container. But I had a new implementation, which is to reset the CSS style of the original container, of the original sticky header. So what I do is comparing the head and the top offset top and the bottom of the sticky region to the scrolling viewport. So we can decide if the current header should be sticked. So if we find that it should be stuck, we can just change its CSS style and make it stick. Yeah. And the next one is a selection list. So a selection list is basically a list box with different list options. And for each list options, you will have a checkbox built in with it. So you can customize the checkbox position, and you can set whether the current item is disabled. So if it is disabled, you cannot select it. And after you select different items in the list, you can get all the selected items from a selection module. So if you want to apply the selection list, the only thing you need to do is like this. You don't need to define the checkbox or the corresponding operations with the checkbox for yourself, because I've already added them into the selection list. So what you need to do is just define a selection list and put all your options here. And then you will get a list like this. Each item will have a checkbox with it. So the demo will be like this. Okay, it's too large. So you can see that. Where's the selection list? Here. Okay, so if you select one, you will find the current select module has already gathered what you are selecting. And like this, like this, like this. And you can use tab to switch between different selection lists and use up arrows and down arrows to switch different items within the list, and use space to check or uncheck. And so that is the selection list. And the implementation for selection list is more easier than the sticky header. We just need to have two parts. The first part is the selection list. The second part is the list option. So when you check a list, you just need to, it will handle the click events, and then it will pass the checked items to the selection module in the selection list. And if you have other components that need to get the selected items, you just need to directly get this one. Yeah. So that's it.
Pretty cool, right? Okay, who's next? I haven't actually seen this one. I have no idea what you're going to show us. It's going to be very exciting.
Which one do you?
Oh, I should probably do this. Yeah, so plug in there. And your laptop on?
Yeah. Oh, wait.
There we go. We stuck halfway.
I think this messed up my.
We are professionals, promise. That's better. Okay, so welcome G1, because I have no idea what we're going to do. Good luck.
Hello, I'm here to talk about the Angular material stepper component today. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Ji-won, and I am a senior at Princeton University, and I'm currently working on the Angular material team. So the agenda for today's talk, first I'll talk about what Angular material stepper component is, and second, points of consideration, third, API and implementation of the material stepper component, and fourth, the demo of different stepper components. So first, what is Angular material stepper component? Here's an example of the stepper component. Stepper component basically divides up the entire workflow into different logical numbered steps, and it allows people to move through the different steps and submit their responses. And why is this important to Angular? It's because material stepper component has actually been one of the highly requested feature by many of the Angular developers. And here you can see that the issue for the feature request has actually been open for more than a year. So I'm sure that a lot of the Angular developers will be happy to hear that the material stepper component the work is going under process. And according to the material design guideline, there are many different types of steppers. The first one is the horizontal stepper on the left. And as you can see, all the labels are placed at the top side by side, and the content is placed below the labels. And the second type is the vertical stepper on the right. And here you can see that the steps are placed vertically stacked, and as the user goes through the steps, they will move on to the steps that are placed below the previous step. The third type is the linear stepper, which means that the users must complete the previous steps in order to move on to the next step, and the non-linear stepper, which means users can go through whichever order they want to complete the different steps. Also, for the steps themselves, there are 3 different types. There's the editable steps, which means people can go back to the form that they've already completed and submit a new response. And the second is the opposite, the non-editable steps, which means if you complete the step once, then you can't go back to the step and resubmit the response. And then there's the third step, which is the optional step, which means people can either choose to complete the step or choose not to complete the step. And there are some important points of consideration. The first is that the material stepper component is actually built on top of the component development kit stepper, which we call CDK stepper for short. And here you can see on the left that the CDK stepper actually contains all the logics for the stepped workflow. For example, the next method, which takes the user to the next valid and available step, and the previous method, which takes the user to the previous valid and available step, are all contained inside the CDK stepper. And on the right, you can see that the MD stepper, which is the material stepper component, actually simply extends the CDK stepper and delegates all the logic to the CDK stepper. And why is this important? Is because this allows the users who do not want to follow the material guideline but would like to create a stepper using the logic for the stepper component would be able to use the CDK stepper instead of the MD stepper component to create their own stepper component. And then to support the horizontal stepper and the vertical stepper, we have the MD horizontal stepper for the horizontal stepper using the horizontal template and the stylings that support the horizontal stepper, which simply extends the MD stepper. And same for the MD vertical stepper, which supports the vertical stepper's template and the stylings. And the second point of consideration is the accessibility with screen readers and supporting keyboard interactions. For this one, we have the area role. We consider two area roles. The first one is the tab role, and then the second one is the accordion role. Both are similar in the sense that they, among the different elements contained inside the container, they show the content of one of the elements. However, the difference is that the tab supports areas selected, which means they show the selected elements content, whereas the accordion simply hides the non-expanded content. Therefore, because for the stepper, we are showing the content of the step that is selected by the users, we decided to move forward with the step with the tab role. And with this decision, the stepper component supports the following keyboard interaction pattern. So with the left and right arrow, users can move to the previous step label or the next step label. And using the enter and space, users can select the step that the focus is currently on. And using the tab, they can move on to the next tabbable element. And with the shift and tab together, they can move to the previous tabbable element. And now moving on to the API and implementation of the material stepper component. Here's how the stepper component can be used to create a simple, very general stepper component. First, you use the selector for the vertical stepper or the horizontal stepper, and inside you place the MD step selector for the step component. And inside, users can either choose to use the step label directive, which is the MD step label, or use the input property label for each of the step to give them the label. And then they would put the content and then they would put the buttons in. There are two different stepper button directives. The first one is the MD stepper previous, which uses the previous method of this CDK stepper, and the MD stepper next uses the next method, which so the users wouldn't need to deal with the logics themselves. They would simply need to use these button directives to place the buttons inside the steps. And this is how users would use the stepper components to create a linear stepper. So if using the forms isn't required, but if the users were to use the forms to create a linear stepper component, then they would need to put in the input linear for the stepper. And then for each steps, they would provide an input of step control, which is the type of abstract control of the top level. And this approach uses, for this approach, the user would be using one form group for each of the steps. So each step would be an independent form group. And here's the second, a little more complicated approach. For this one, the entire stepper is one form, and each step is a form group. So a stepper would be an array of form groups. However, the other implementation is the same in the sense that for the stepper, the users would provide, or the developers would provide the input of linear property, and for each step, they would provide the input of step control property. And inside the TypeScript file, they would create the form group or the form array depending on which of the two approaches they choose to go with. And using the form builder is not required. You can either choose to build it with the form builder, or you can just create an independent form groups on its own. Some of the remaining work for the material stepper component: first, updating the CSS to follow the material design guideline, and adding more animation for a more smooth transition of the stepper workflow. And second, adding more properties to support different types of steps, such as the editable steps and the optional steps. If anyone's interested in seeing the work that is going on for the material design stepper component, you can go to Angular/material2 on GitHub and go to the stepper branch to see the work. I will show you the demo of the stepper component. So here, the one on the top is a demo of the vertical stepper component, and it is an example of when you're checking out a shopping cart. So here you would first input shipping address, you can see that the first name, the last name, and the address are required. So if you want to move forward, then you'd be required to fill in the name. So I'd fill in the name and the address, and I can move on to the payment method. And if I wanted to, I could go back to the previous step. And once I put in the card number, I can go on to the additional request. And because this is not required, I can simply go on and complete my order. And the one below is an example of the horizontal stepper. And this is an example of the case when you are creating your account on a website. And you create a username using an email. And you can type in the password, and then you can move on to the next step. You can also use an arrow keys to move across different steps. And once the required fields are filled out, then you would move on to the next step. So thank you.
I think those two can continue to eat our free food. What do you think? Yeah. I'll go ahead and bring up Abhi to do the last demo. Just a personal note, because I do know what he's going to be talking about. It's been very interesting to watch you come in as a fresh-faced university student and learn the horror of JavaScript bundling and what tooling is really like. So it's all yours. Welcome. I think this is your setup. I don't have your demo up, but you can get to it.
Just a link. All right. Hey, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, cool. So I'm Abhi. I just finished my second year at the University of Chicago. I'm studying computer science. So Rob said that we're almost done with our internship. In my case, that's wishful thinking. He still has a month of dealing with me eating free food. True. It's a trade-off. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. My project is called Edit.ng. It's been in the works for a while, but there's a bit of context that's required for me to really explain it. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that first. I'm going to talk about Angular template compilations, specifically the two paradigms that are currently in use: ahead-of-time compilation, AOT, and just-in-time compilation, or JIT. If you're not familiar with those, don't worry. I'll go over them in a bit more detail. And then I'm going to talk about some growing pains that the community has experienced with AOT, and I'll talk about how Edit.ng aims to resolve these. So what is Angular template compilation? Well, as you all know, the magic of Angular is that you can extend HTML by adding data binding properties. You can add iteration over objects with ng-for, conditionals with ng-if, all that magic that makes applications really cool and really nice to write in Angular. So the template compilation step transforms these Angular HTML templates, which the browser can't natively understand because they have all these additional properties, into runnable JavaScript code that the browser actually knows how to execute. So as an example, we can take this simple H1 element. The Angular template compiler will take this and turn it into JavaScript code that's actually executed in the browser to create this element, display the heading, display the text, display any data binding properties that you may add to it, handle all of the magic that Angular does for you. And there are two paradigms that have historically been in use and are currently in use. The first one, which is what Angular was created with, is just-in-time compilation. This does the compilation step in browser on page load. So what this means is that you're writing your TypeScript or your JavaScript code, and you ship code that looks very similar to that to the browser directly. It might be bundled with Webpack or Rollup to make it easier to ship, but you're shipping code that looks very similar to what you actually write. Then the Angular template compiler, which you also bundle with your application, takes over and turns the HTML that you write into JavaScript code and executes all the magic of Angular. But this has some problems with it, namely that template compilation needs to happen on every single page load, and you also have to bundle the entire compiler with the application. This leads to a lot of issues, such as large time to interactive, especially for complicated apps, and especially on devices that are more underpowered, such as mobile devices. And to resolve this issue, the Angular team has introduced this new paradigm called ahead-of-time compilation. As the name implies, this is template compilation ahead of time as a step in your build process. So you run the template compiler before the code even hits the user's browser. You write the code, run the compiler, it generates the compiled JavaScript, you bundle that, and ship it to the user. And this has pretty significant benefits because you don't need to include the template compiler. And for smaller apps, it can have the bundle size. As your applications grow in size, this isn't necessarily true because obviously the compiler is a fixed size, but you get additional benefits such as faster application bootstrap and component rendering because all of the JavaScript doesn't need to be parsed and interpreted and compiled. You can just go ahead and run your application. You also get secondary benefits such as template parse errors being detected at build time and a few security benefits. A full discussion of AOT versus JIT and the relevant benefits are outside the scope of this talk, but just trust me when I say that AOT is better. Use it, please. And actually, so Jeff wrote this article and that has some really cool metrics that really drove home the benefits of AOT to me. He saw an 84% improvement in load time when converting an application from JIT to AOT. And actually on code.gov, when he converted it from JIT to AOT, he saw 159% improvement in script execution time. I think there was this one study that Amazon did a few years back where they saw that every 100 milliseconds in latency led to a 1% decrease in revenue. That's actually pretty huge, even if you don't operate on the scale of Amazon. In a world where 100 milliseconds of latency leads to that much decrease in revenue, performance is really essential to have. Not only does it really impact the user experience and make things nicer for the user, it can directly impact your bottom line. So even though AOT is great, there have been some growing pains with it. As Jeff mentioned, AOT requires that your components be statically analyzable. Because it's an ahead of time compilation process, you can't really do some of the dynamic component rendering that people have done with JIT or with AngularJS. There are additional issues such as some bugs or some people having difficulties converting from JIT to AOT. And so as with all bugs, you can make a bug reproduction, right? You can put it in Plunker or JS Fiddle or CodePen and send it to the Angular team who will fix your bug for you, right? Well, so for AOT, that doesn't really work because by its nature, it only runs as a build step and can't run in the browser itself. This makes it really, really difficult to share AOT examples and bug reproductions because since it doesn't run in the browser, you can't run it in browser editors such as Plunker or JS Fiddle. And so people have had to resort to making a GitHub repository specifically for their bug reproduction or sending a zip file with the code and sending that. That's unwieldy, it takes time to set up, it's pretty annoying. So we would all love it if there was a Plunker but for AOT, and that's kind of what Edit.ng provides. It runs an AOT build pipeline entirely in the browser, allowing easy editing and sharing of AOT applications just by sharing a URL. You can think of it, as I said, as Plunker but for AOT. As far as I'm aware, there aren't plans to replace Plunker with this tool. Right now, the purpose is for bug reproductions. And the planned and current features include display of compilation errors entirely in browser, integration with the Monaco editor, the same editor that VS Code provides, which provides really nice IntelliSense for type hinting, integration with the Angular language service, so you get all of these benefits for template compilation inline and in their own separate files, and easy sharing of created applications. Let me go ahead and talk about the architecture. There's no server involved here. A big requirement of this project was that it could be used internally at Google. And obviously, internal developers can't take internal code and stick it on some site that then saves that code on the server. That's a huge security vulnerability. So from the start, we designed this such that a server isn't actually needed to execute your code. We run the AOT compiler entirely in browser in a web worker. So when you load up Edit.ng, the AOT compiler instantiates itself. It loads dependencies, gets ready to perform compilation. And then at some point later, when a user hits compile, the application files are post-messaged to that web worker. The compiler runs AOT compilation and right now runs rollup to generate a single bundle of the application. This is all hidden from the user. The user doesn't have to do anything more than hit compile. Then when the compiler is done, it sends that bundle back to the main thread and displays it in the editor. I've talked a lot, so let's show a demo now. Let's see. Can we full screen this? Okay. Yeah, I don't use Macs. Okay, so here's the editor. The focus for this project is more so on the architecture of the application and less so on the UI, but it's functional right now. As you can see, you have the editor. You can edit application files. You get nice type hinting with Monaco. So you have all of the nice features that you would expect an editor to have. And when we go ahead and hit compile, now it's running the compiler. Performance is right now something we're working on. I mentioned that we use rollup, but we're actually working on getting rid of that. So that should have compile time on this. It should have compile time. And as you can see, we have this very simple Tour of Heroes application running in the browser. This is AOT compiled, and it's happened without a server, without any local build tooling. It's pretty cool. What's even cooler about it is that it allows you to debug errors right here too. You can see that I made a typo in let. Should I zoom in a bit? Can everyone see that? Well, okay. You can see that I made a typo in let, Lee Hero of Heroes. That's not proper Angular syntax, so you'd expect a compilation error. And you can see that the template compilation errors show up right here. Furthermore, we provide these nice red squigglies, so you can actually see where the error message is. Clicking on the error will also highlight it. It's pretty cool, I think. How do I exit out of this? Okay. So Steven also made this pretty cool demo that I really like. We all know that fidget spinners are the big new craze among people my age now. And so Steven put together this fidget spinner that's running in Angular, entirely AOT compiled, entirely running in the browser. And if I copy this link and paste it into a short link, I can send it to someone and they can run this directly. For sharing bug reproductions, it makes life so much easier. No need to create a GitHub repository, no need to create a zip file. Just put in your application code, hit compile, and share. All right, that's all I have. I just made a Twitter. Follow me, please. Thanks.
Pretty cool. I think that's the end of our agenda. So we'll do some Q&A if people have questions, comments, concerns. Feel free to raise your hand and ask. All the speakers you can come up, Jeff. It's cool. Come on.
Questions?
Come on, somebody ask Jeff a question, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. You go ahead.
Well, last time I saw you, your beard was much longer. I'm just wondering what happened.
Everything is okay except the beard. Beard's off limits. It was too scratchy. Summer cut. Angular Connect will be in November. It should be good by then.
Yeah.
You want to pass the microphone to the person who actually had the question now?
Thank you very much for the actually upgrade part. We are in the transition phase right now. We are running as hybrid application. I have a question about ng include. Maybe it's a paid service, but there is in our ng include, we are dynamically passing the URL. Is it possible to do with ng template?
I'll let Rob Wormald answer this one because I think this is something he spent more time on.
So it depends. The short answer is if you want to do kind of full-on $ compile, arbitrary, whatever you want to do, that's fairly difficult today. But actually, one of the best resources to look at today is the Angular.io website, because the Angular.io website is doing effectively ng include. That is that, all of our content is basically HTML. And so we don't want to turn all of that HTML into JavaScript just to display, static HTML. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But, if you look at docs, not like I'll pull one up here. If you look at our docs, we actually have.
Thanks, Christina.
Sorry. See if I can find one here. So for example,
you need to share your screen again.
Oh, do I?
You need to go to local person.
Whatever. Yeah, okay. Here we go. And so a lot of these, like a lot of the stuff in here, we want to be interactive, right? But we don't want to sort of make the entire document just all JavaScript because, it's 10% interactivity, right? So a lot of what we do is actually we do a straight HTML import. We go pull in HTML, and then we can actually just query that HTML because it's HTML and go ahead and bootstrap directives into it, for example, right? So we can say, well, this is a Plunker widget that we know about, and we can say, go ahead and bootstrap just this component into this part of the page. So that's one option. That's kind of the sort of, I have a bunch of predefined stuff that I want to organize slightly differently. And we find that works for most cases. When you want to do kind of full-on arbitrary $ compile, that's a little bit more difficult today, which is effectively what ng-include is doing. It is just $ compile. I don't have a lot of information for you today on what to do about that. Part of that is that we are in the process of kind of changing over Angular from AOT or from JIT to AOT by default. And a lot of what we're going to be looking at for v6, so that's the kind of the next major version after the next one, is can we open up APIs to allow this sort of thing? If you ever look at the output of Angular's compiled code, what Abi was showing off, then that is just a data structure. It is just a structure that has, divs notated and data binding, and it's something you could hand code. And that's probably where we'll end up. We're not quite ready to go there yet because we're making sure that our APIs are stable. We're making sure that everything kind of is happy before we make it a public API. And at that point, then you could create your own abstraction that dynamically creates views and forms and whatever you want to do. And if you want, we can talk deeply after that if you'd like. But in general, that's kind of the way we're going. We want to make sure that our APIs are stable for 5 or 6, and then we're likely going to open up the view engine so that you can kind of begin to assemble your own views as necessary. And then it's very easy to build a $ compile ng-include on top of that.
That's what I was going to say too.
So you don't recommend at this moment using ng template for that?
It depends. Like it's not something that you can, again, if you have a finite set of things, then ng template is great, right? Because they will be compiled as you compile the application. If it's something that, as Jeff said, it's going to come off of a server or out of a database where you have user editing templates, that's a little more difficult to do, and that's something we want to solve a little bit later.
Thank you.
Let's walk all the way back here.
You have interns to do that for you.
That's true.
I was a little confused when you were talking about the JIT and the AOT, and you said that you were surprised, or you were like surprised that the AOT was so much faster than the JIT. To me, that makes a lot of sense. Could you explain a little bit deeper why some people might think that the JIT wouldn't be as efficient as the AOT? I mean, to me, it just makes a lot of sense that the AOT would be a lot faster because you compile it beforehand.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I actually just learned Angular 2 months ago. I had started out using React, and then I got onto the Angular team, and so I've switched over. I'm now an Angular fan, but so
Not getting to eat out of the mini.
so that was more a personal anecdote. I was just surprised by like the magnitude of 129% improvement in the script execution time. I knew there would be an improvement. I just didn't realize it would be that significant.
Yeah, but the fact that you're compiling it before you bring it down, you're taking all that off that looks right.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely makes sense. I was just surprised by the magnitude, if that makes sense.
And I would say that, like, just from personal experience of talking to a lot of developers, it's less that it's one or the other. Most people don't actually know that there are two things going on. The vast majority of developers don't actually know that there are two different modes, or if they do, they don't quite understand. And I didn't, again, for the first 18 months I was on this team, I didn't understand them. I still don't fully understand the difference in a lot of cases. But in general, like it's something that and part of what we're doing for V5 and V6 is to make this distinction go away, because you have to think about it today. And that's what Abi's project is about, is that you have to think differently for AOT and JIT. The rules are different, right? And so a lot of the work we're doing is to bring these things so they're consistent. So you just basically have fast mode and slow mode is the way we think about it. Whereas right now they are significantly kind of different ideas.
I mean, it makes sense to me that you would do JIT first because it's so much easier than AOT. But once you got AOT working, then you would never look back.
Yep. And for a lot of people, again, because we didn't clearly sort of say these are the two different things and this is how they work differently. A lot of people would go 6 months of building an application and never do an AOT build, right? And that's a frustrating thing, because then you find the errors 6 months after you've written the code, and that's not great. So a lot of the work is making AOT fast enough, which is, again, part of what Abhi was working on, so that you don't have to have this JIT mode, right? We'll just be fast enough to do AOT all the time, and then it will just be the compiler rather than the AOT compiler. Yeah.
Build will be fast enough.
Yes, always, yes. Cool.
Thank you.
I'll hold it so I can pull it away.
So when you guys are working with clients on upgrade, do you find that it's possible to integrate the CLI, or do you kind of start fresh?
Yeah, we prefer the CLI. So if we come in early enough where they haven't actually started anything yet, then we'll usually say to start with the CLI, because you don't have to deal with thinking about build as like how you compile application as another thing to think about. So even without upgrade, like most of our clients will start on CLI until there's a point where they need to optimize something that CLI won't allow them to do themselves, and they'll do the eject and that. But yeah, CLI it'll set up like the shell example I did for my app was CLI based, and when we walk through, I think our blog article also, most of our blog articles will use CLI as a starting point just to simplify things.
So I guess some additional questions for the interns. You kind of mentioned a little bit about what you had learned. I'm curious a little bit more about that. I started by asking or wondering about your projects and when they go into production, or if there was anything you could say in that regard. But in case you can't, just any particular insights and learnings that you've had.
I'm putting you on the spot.
I also haven't used Angular before I joined the team, so I'm learning as I'm creating the component, but I'm hoping to get the stepper component merged into master by the end of my internship. Yeah.
When's your internship done?
This is my 8th week, and I have 4 more.
Okay, so for me, before I start my internship, I used AngularJS. Yeah, but not Angular. Yeah. So I also just started learning Angular about 3 months ago. And so for now, I'll create 2 components. And for the sticky header, it has merged into the sticky header branch. So I hope it can be merged into master soon.
Jeremy? Comment?
Thank you, Jeremy.
I don't know what's holding it up. Same question.
Yeah, actually, so something that really struck me, especially in the past few days, was surprisingly how much of what you learn in CS classes is actually applicable. Because like I'm reviewing for interviews again now that the season is starting up, and I'm realizing that especially in the JavaScript world, like I need to get better with dealing with trees. I ran into a problem that it was basically a textbook interview problem, and I realized that I should have paid more attention in intro CS because that would have made it a lot easier. And then also like, especially dealing with the internals of the Angular compiler. I wish I'd taken compilers because I understand the compiler at a very high 1-sentence level. It creates an AST and it outputs some code. But going more in depth, I have no idea what's going on. It's actually kind of surprising how applicable CS classes can be. So.
It's okay. Even if you want to ask about React, it's okay. We're not going to yell at you. It's fine.
I told you I switched. I've seen the light.
Cool. No other questions? No? Going once, going twice. There's one more. That's fine.
Actually, that's a really interesting point. If you could, just from your point of view, talk about, have you used Polymer and maybe a little bit of Polymer React, just from your point of view? Because it's really interesting that React mixes the CSS and the JavaScript all together, and a lot of people hate that. Some people like it. I don't know.
Yeah. So I actually haven't used Polymer. So I think that
Careful.
I think it's really a matter of personal preference, whether or not you prefer like HTML inside your JavaScript or the logic inside your HTML. I mean, there are benefits of both. And I think to a big extent, it depends on your use case as well. My knowledge isn't as in-depth as I would like, so I can't give like a full commentary about the relative merits of each. But yeah, I think it's a matter of use case and preference, really.
That's a good question.
And I mean, that would be literally the exact same answer I would give if I was asked, at a conference or whatever. And I think that that's a pretty clear answer that, they do the same thing. I think they have a lot of the same benefits. We all learn from each other. There's a lot that we've learned from React, right? And it really comes down to personal preferences, right? I will convince nobody in this room who loves JSX to love templates, and nobody who loves templates often will switch to JSX, right? So that's a perfectly reasonable way to think about it.
And do you guys ever get into a situation where you just start finding that it's not always a hammer to a nail? You just need the right thing. So sometimes you'll go a little bit of Polymer, and then you'll go a little bit of Angular, depending on where on the website you are and what you're doing. So not everything is a hammer, not everything is a nail.
Sure, and I think that that's actually one of the things that I am spending a whole bunch of my time on at the moment. Is in general, Angular is looked at as a framework for building large applications. You're building big, kind of behind the firewall enterprise things, and we're very, very good at that, right? It's the bread and butter of Angular. But the world has changed from when AngularJS was built. We were the only big JavaScript framework, right? You would pick up Angular, you'd build a whole application with it. And that's not the world we live in today, right? Most applications have some mix of Polymer, might be React, might be Preact, might be any of the other dozen JavaScript frameworks. You might have both running at the same time. You might be doing JS and not. You might be building big enterprise apps, but you might be building very important, where performance is very important, things that are, SEO important, which is different than building a CRM. There are different ways of doing things. And so we're working on a project we're sort of calling fundamentally right now embeddable Angular, which would allow you to basically just take an Angular component, spit it out, and use it anywhere, right? So rather than kind of bootstrapping Angular on the whole world, be able to build effectively web components or web components with Angular and emit it as a web component, right? So these are the kind of things we're looking at, because we hear a lot of different use cases for things like CRMs and shopping sites and all these different cases. And one of the nice things about all this compiler that we have is that we can allow you to write the same syntax, write templates. That's kind of the idea of Angular. So we can give you this platform you can write on top of. You can write an Angular component, and it's the compiler's job to turn it into something that will run either in an Angular application or as a web component inside of a Polymer application. And so that's the sort of stuff we're looking at, because we realize that it is a very heterogeneous world today, and we want to make it easy to use Angular wherever it makes sense. So that's something we're definitely gonna be looking at for kind of V5 and V6.
Yeah, that makes me very happy.
Good to hear.
For the ladies, could you put your GitHub back up? Because I didn't get the picture. Or is it on meetup.com?
Oh, they're on Angular/material too. Mine's on the stepper branch and
Sticky header branch.
Okay.
I think you need to switch.
It's fine. It's material too.
So when working with some of the clients that wanted to upgrade, what's the typical time that a project to upgrade and make it stable takes?
Most of the teams we help are pretty large applications, like hundreds of developers, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, applications of applications, like multi-application projects. So some of those, it's like year-plus horizons that they'll be in hybrid mode. So on our blog, we kind of identify the strategies we take to get started, which our big focus is we want to help them get started, get the right things in place, like get the shell in place, and then once the shell is in place, try to move the whole home screen of the application to just Angular, and then lazily load the AngularJS bit so that you can have the nice quick loading performance and other benefits of having that, and then we support them as they go. So it really depends on the application. Like getting the shell in place, usually it's a couple days. Like it takes a few minutes to actually create the shell, and then you debug it, you look at performance, you do a lot of QA to make sure it doesn't cause things to stop working. And then after that, it's really pretty subjective to business requirements, how big of a priority it is for business to upgrade, because usually people want to keep velocity, they want to keep adding features while they're also upgrading things. So yeah, a lot of variance.
Would you say it's fair to say that there's a fixed cost you pay at the beginning, and then it's fairly...
The largest cost is at the beginning. Like once getting the shell in place is usually pretty consistent. It's like a few days to work through issues. And then when you start to say, okay, I want to upgrade this component to Angular, usually that's the hardest part, because there's this dependency graph of things that you have to decide what else needs to be upgraded along with it, or if you just want to upgrade it using the upgrade module. So if you want to say, oh, I want to upgrade this component and its dependencies, then the graph tends to be pretty large up front. Then the next thing you upgrade, you've probably already upgraded like half its dependencies with the previous module component you did. So it tends to get like easier over time, and teams start to come out of the clouds of gloom of the difficulties of upgrade, and they've got us there to help them, so everything is happy. But it's a serious effort. Like it's like I said, nothing was developed with the assumption it'd be running inside an Angular application with zones and all those things. So there's some thought that needs to go into it.
He doesn't even work.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So I like the way you categorize those pain points of migration, right, from Angular 1 to AngularJS to Angular. And I think that people or companies that are lucky to use a company like you can definitely benefit a lot from that.
I'm blushing.
Yeah. Now, how about all the other people on the internet, basically, who don't have access to that, and they're basically looking at a lot of information on message boards, Stack Overflow, and so on. Now, what I have noticed is that at least between AngularJS and Angular, there is a clean cut, and you can just search for Angular 2, and you won't see anything old, right? But now the problem is between Angular 2 and the next versions, there are some incompatibilities again and changes, and you look for something like dynamic content in a page, right? And you would see many different versions and many different solutions. You try them out, most of them don't work anymore. So what could be the plan for managing that? Because that's damage for the users, right? And maybe opportunities for companies like you, or even for the Angular team, because that's your baby, that's your child there, this technology. And you don't want people to be frustrated and move to other technologies. So is there a plan to fill that gap and maybe go to message boards and start directing people to the right solutions?
If I had my way, then we would shut down all the message boards and delete everything from Stack Overflow. I mean, but also that's one of the ways we stay in business. Is there's so much misinformation out there, and we help we know the right thing to do. So please keep all the bad content out. So I guess the first question is like, so we try to, in terms of like wanting clear, correct, up-to-date content. With Upgrade, we try really hard to, one, we write our own blog posts and books and things. With the books, like you can find most of the content of the books in our blog for free. And so the things we see, we always try it. And like this talk was one thing, like we've seen a lot of patterns, let's do a talk about it. So we try to put as much clear information out there. I think our blog, I would say you'd probably agree, is a pretty good source of like good information to do. So Upgrade and all that kind of stuff, I'll say that's my answer. I'll let Rob, the developer advocate, take the other answers about how to clear up all the misinformation or outdated information on the internet.
Yeah. If I knew the answer to that, my job would be done already, right? Like, so this is, there's a lot of discussion on the internet about is it Angular, Angular 2? Jeff made the joke at the beginning, and a lot of this is why we made such a big deal about AngularJS versus Angular, right? Because if we can be consistent, then what we find, and we happen to work for a really big company that does internet search, so we have some insight into this. The more consistent we can be, what we hope to happen is that over time, the more people use the word Angular, not AngularJS, that content will rise to the top. The other kind of goal of this is that while I think that it is fair to say that, especially between RC4 and RC5 or RC6, if you've used Angular before that, you know that there was a major change when that happened. Our goal in general is to evolve going forward. So you won't hear us refer to it typically as Angular 2, Angular 4, Angular 5, because that sort of implies that there is a major difference between them, right? There are obviously going to be minor differences between 4 and 5, or 2 and 3, or 3 didn't exist, 2 or 4, 2 or 5. But in general, we want to make these changes incremental enough that this information should typically not become out of date, right? The other thing we've just finished doing, if you haven't noticed, is our website's just been written from what was an AngularJS app when we were building the Angular website, which is now an Angular website. And part of that was to basically kind of throw out all the old stuff, which had accumulated over the time we were building it, and set up a new infrastructure so we can have multi-version documentation, so we can have localized, translated documentation, right? And the ability to say, well, this was what is version 4, and this is what it was in version 2, and this is what it was in version 1, or this was introduced in version 4, has existed till version 6. And so we want to make that stuff easier to reference. We are actually working with the Stack Overflow people to make sure that we centralize everything under Angular and AngularJS, so we don't have Angular 2 and Angular 4 and whatever. I'm working on the people who run our Reddit to do the same thing. So again, we don't have Reddit Angular 2, Angular 4, Angular 5, which are reserved and registered. I went and checked. Somebody's already done that. And so that's why we make such a big deal about the consistent naming. If you find something that is obviously wrong, obviously out of date, and when we come across them, I will often reach out to the author and say, hey, this thing has changed. It'd be cool if you would update it. But again, I don't want to be the person that says, hey, this is the Angular team calling, you really need to update your blog, right? That's not, this is open source. This is not how it works. And for me, like, if I got that email from the Angular team a year and a half ago, I would have been mad, right? Like, I will reach out and say, hey, this is something that would be cool. If you find them, what? Yeah, probably. You probably did. It's the kind of thing you would do. But if you find something, though, and if it's obviously wrong, then please drop me an email. I'll give you my email address. It's robwormald@google.com for everybody in here. You can send me a tweet, and I'm quite happy to track it down, reach out to that person, go ahead and see if we can get it updated. At the end of the day, there are only so many hours in the day, and we are not able to, as much as I would love to spend my entire day on the internet in message boards and on chat forums, I do spend 50% of my day on that. But it means, there's a finite amount of time in the day. And so we rely on our community, who are generally very good about this kind of stuff, to keep each other updated, to, send those comments in and say, hey, this would be really cool if you could get updated and changed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, pass that one forward.
So one of the things that you mentioned was that, well, obviously Angular.js wasn't designed to run inside of Angular. With Angular and Angular, well, to Angular, were there any lessons learned that maybe in the future there will be a new version, and what could have been improved so that Angular can be embedded into the next generation framework?
I would say for me that the kind of the top of that list is that part of the problem with an AngularJS application is that everybody starts with the root scope, right? And if you start putting stuff on root scope, then your entire application is basically, you cannot understand where things come from. You don't understand where this thing is being updated, where it's changing, whatever, right? So that's one of the more challenging things when you start trying to integrate the two of them. And so when you look at an Angular application, Angular components are very, very encapsulated, right? There isn't a root scope in an Angular application, and that's very much on purpose, right? That you very clearly see that this is now a portable unit, right? NG modules work the same way. And the other thing is that this is why we have this compiler, right? Is that we know that the web is going to change. The whole kind of deal in Angular is that we never, ever, trust me, ever want to go through AngularJS to Angular ever again. I will quit, right? I will go live in the forest before we do that again, right? And so having a compiler, having this sort of understanding that the world will change, the web will get better, there will be new APIs. And the reason that we've introduced all this infrastructure, this tooling, AOT, compilers, et cetera, is to make a bet that we know the world's going to change and we should be ready for that change. And going back to the JSX template question, which is a totally fair question, the reason we have you write templates is that templates are declarative. There is no implementation details inside of a template, right? So you can write a template and we can recompile it as the versions of Angular change. And we did that between version 2 and version 4. We took what was written over a year and a half, 2 years, the first version, Angular 2.0, and in Angular 4, we actually just threw the whole thing out and started again, right? But almost nobody noticed that because we did it under the surface with the compiler. And that's kind of the long-term bet. And personally, I think we've really only scratched the surface of what we can do with that stuff. Some of the stuff I've been playing with web components, right? it's opening up a very, very interesting door. And I'm super excited about where the web's going to go for the next 10 years. And really our goal is to make Angular the tool, whatever the web looks like for the next 10 years, right? And that's kind of the philosophy. Lessons learned, tons. I think that there are tons of things that we still learn every day. JavaScript bundling was one that I mentioned, right? That's been the bane of the last 18 months of my life. And I still don't have a right answer for you on a lot of that stuff. But again, this is a bet that the web will catch up in these places. We will get to that point, but you as developers shouldn't be affected by that, right? You shouldn't have to rewrite your application ever again. We want to make that an incremental sort of evolutionary process. Manifesto like rant over, but sorry. I know, right? Other questions, comments?
There are to-go boxes in the back, so help pack up some of the food and take it home so I don't have to eat it all. Should I say thank you?
You can say thank you.
All right, thank you for coming. We'll be hanging out, so.
Should we turn this off too?
They'll shut it down. Hi.
I had a question.
Sure.
My name is Anup. I
Rob.
work for Macy's.com.
Okay.
Yeah. So my question was a bit lengthy. That's why I said
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
So I'm migrating my app from JIT to AOT.
Okay.
So with the last demo, that's the question that I have is, what is that part that you cannot reproduce in JIT?